Hi folks, Thibaut Van Dam here with another YouTube video. And for those of you who are not familiar with my channel, I am a DIY singer-songwriter and guitar tutor based in Southeast London. And today we're going to be continuing the video series all about practical guitar and music theory, which I started maybe about a month ago. And the goal was simple. I just wanted to consolidate all the ideas I had about playing guitar in one place, both for my current students, but anyone else that was interested in learning. When I was learning, I found that there was tons of resources and they all approached learning guitar differently. But I actually think that there is a really clear, defined path to learning how to play guitar practically. And so this is the journey that I've started now. And for anyone that finds this interesting and helpful, please consider liking the video and of course, consider subscribing and joining me on this journey. It is the best way to stay up to date with the new videos I make about this sort of topic. And of course, it continues to motivate me to make these new videos. Also, of course, thank you to the people that do subscribe. It does, keep pushing me forward to making stuff. And I just wanted to address the fact that I missed yesterday's video. I release these videos every Sunday, but I missed it because I've been traveling and I have a ton of other excuses. But right now I'm not even in Southeast London. I am in the United States. I'm in New Jersey, which is my hometown. And it's good to be home just because the weather is beautiful and I'm going to go swimming later. But I thought I'd make this video just to make up for yesterday nonetheless. So with all that out of the way, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to be looking at the chromatic scale. The chromatic scale is probably one of the most important ideas in playing guitar, both theoretically and practically. And I know I just sort of threw that as a comment like nonchalantly, but I really believe that. In my years of learning and teaching, I found that a lot of people look at the chromatic scale way later on. And before then, when it really comes down to it, people look firstly at how to correctly tune the guitar. And I understand why, because if you have a guitar that's in tune, that's great. You know, your guitar is in tune, you can play and you can start jumping right in on the deep end. You can start trying to make chords and things like that, make things sound good. But actually learning the chromatic scale long before you actually learn about major scales or before you learn about how to form chords or what the correct tuning of the guitar is, if you learn the chromatic scale first, all of the later ideas we'll be talking about, like intervals or harmonizing the major scale or working out key signatures or chord extensions, things like this. These are the big ideas that we'll be getting to. And when we get to them, if you know the chromatic scale well, you will be able to navigate those ideas really, really well. So I have a few bullet points that I just want to outline about the chromatic scale. And to help me sort of explain it, I will be just playing through all the notes starting from the lowest string on the guitar. And if you have a guitar, you're welcome to try this with me. I also recommend anyone that's looking to learn the chromatic scale really well to buy a chromatic tuner. So the first thing I'll say about the chromatic scale, starting from this low note, this note is E. And so right off the bat, we already know that the chromatic scale is alphabetized. It uses letters to indicate which notes are which. So the first note here is E, and as we go up, we start going through the alphabet, E, F. And that seems normal actually, but to be honest, this is already one of the exceptions to the rule. So the chromatic scale goes from the letters A to G, at which point it repeats. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. But if you counted A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, you end up with 7 notes. 7 notes does not equate to a full 12 notes, which is actually how many notes there are in the chromatic scale. So where do the 5 missing notes come from? Well, those 5 missing notes are actually called accidentals. Those are notes that are called either sharps or flats. Now, as an aside, sharp and flat, just to reiterate from a past video, the idea of what is sharp and flat is relative. So if you are sharpening a note, that means to increase its pitch. When we talk about playing notes on the guitar, the idea of sharpening a note is actually increasing the pitch specifically by a semitone. And a semitone translates to 1 fret. So this has been sharpened by 1 fret or 1 semitone. And if we sharpen it one more time, we end up on another note. Now this note is F sharp. And that makes sense, right? E, F, F sharp. But then the question is, well, why doesn't E have an E sharp? So this is one of the few exceptions to the rule, because actually most of the notes will have a sharp, or equally you could think of them as flats, but E will not. So E will just go E, F, then we will sharpen the F to make it an F sharp, And then we have G. Again, take note of the fact that it's been alphabetized. E, F, G. And then G sharp, A sharp, B. And B is the second anomaly where we don't have a B sharp, we just have C. So instead of B sharp, we have C. It continues C sharp, D sharp, so D sharp, and then E again. And this goes hand in hand with this idea that I had pointed out in a previous video, this idea of these dots all along the neck. And I may have showed it in this video, but I'll just show it now. You can see we have these dots on the neck. In my past video, I had pointed out that these dots help us navigate the neck. These two dots right here, they basically indicate to us the 12th fret, the point at which the chromatic scale will actually repeat. That's true not only on this string, but on all the strings, because the chromatic scale itself is only 12 notes long. So once we go from E, we end up D, D sharp on the 12th fret, E again, and it continues. F, F sharp, G. And so as we break through that octave, and just as an aside, octave is referencing to intervals, which is a separate topic that I'll look at a later time. As we break through the octave, we notice that the chromatic scale is identical, right? Remember, E doesn't have the sharp, it just goes to F. F goes to F sharp and G, and it could continue like this indefinitely. So this is kind of, I think, the first thing to really point out is that the chromatic scale itself, this idea of which notes have sharps and flats and which ones don't, that idea, those notes, they don't change ever. So although it's these 12 notes, if you can memorize this, this is something that will prove to be invaluable. So as I was going through this video, I found that there are kind of three more broad questions we could start to ask. So the first thing I'll say, I'll actually address the third kind of question, or as it were, whatever it is, because I think it relates to that thing I just talked about, which is passing through the octave. So what about when we pass the 12th fret? So as we go through notes on the 12th fret, as we pass through this 12th fret, we actually enter this kind of what I would say is a minus 12 rule. It's a really basic math idea, but basically the idea is if this is E and this is the 12th fret, if we minus 12 from this note, we end up with 0. That means that these notes are the same. So the 12th fret, E, is the same as 12 minus 12, which is 0, open. That's true of the 13th fret too. So if we take 13, the 13th fret, and we minus 12 from it, which is 1 octave or 1 full chromatic scale, and we minus 12, we get left with 13 minus 12 is 1, right? So we end up with this note here. This is F, and so is this. This is a really important idea as we continue going through this. So we'll go to the 14th fret now. 14th fret here you can see is F sharp. If we minus 12 from 14, we end up with 2. So 14 minus 12 is 2. So this is F sharp, and so is this. And so there's this trend here. Whatever this note is beyond the 12th fret, if we minus 12 from it, we end up with the fret number that we would have to play in order to play the same note down here. This is the idea of the octave. And this is an important idea. I would categorize this as something that I started teaching my students called a practical string rule. This is a way of navigating the fretboard easily between strings or within a string, so that way you can easily figure out the interval. So in this case, we're talking about the interval, which is an octave. But there are other practical string rules, like if you play 0 and the 2nd fret on the string below, that's always a perfect 5th. But again, I'll talk about that in a later video when I look at intervals. But I think that this is a really important and interesting idea to start to consider as we move forward with this new information about the chromatic scale. So another question you might ask is, how do we decide if we call a note sharp or flat? So like I was saying before, as we are sharpening, as we are increasing the pitch of a note, we sharpen it. So we call it a sharp. So if I'm playing F and I've gone up a semitone, I have sharpened it by a semitone, it is now F sharp. And the way that I would describe it is simply that whatever note I have sharpened by a semitone, I describe as a sharp and then the note that has preceded it. Whereas if I was thinking in terms of flats, it's always the note that, again, preceded it. It's directional. So if I flatten the E, I've gone down in pitch from E. I have flattened the E, so therefore E flat. But again, it only has to do with direction and thinking about it in that way. Now, to speak frankly, I never think in flat. And this is because I always start playing somewhere down here and I usually move up the fretboard. That means that I'm always inherently sharpening the notes. And so the idea of flat is actually a little bit foreign to me. And to help keep my ideas really, really clear and so that I don't get confused, I don't mix sharps and flats. I don't really think to myself, oh, well, this is F sharp, but that's A flat. That would get chaotic. So I just think totally in sharp. It is the note and then the sharpened version of that note, except for in the case of E, which doesn't have a sharp, and the case of B, which also does not have a sharp. It just goes to F and C respectively. So then a final question to ask is, how do we remember broadly which notes have accidentals? And I feel like I just sort of answered that just a moment ago, but it is better to think about what the exceptions are rather than which ones actually have the sharps or flats. So we talked about how to distinguish if we're going to call something sharp or flat. It's about if we're moving up in pitch or down in pitch. But overall, how do we think about which ones actually have it? So we know that E doesn't have a sharp and we know that B doesn't have a sharp. They go to F and C respectively. And so because of that, if you remember those rules, especially starting with the low E string, we know E, F, right? If we know that, then actually we can skip ahead and say, realistically, we don't really need to think about the others. We can assume that they have an accidental. So we can assume that G has an accidental because it is not E and it is not B. That's sort of how I think about it. But again, this idea of the chromatic scale is something that's going to take you a while to really take in, or you might get it immediately if you have good memory. My best advice though, and I mentioned this probably earlier on, maybe at the beginning of the video, the best way to really memorize and start using, or the best way to really start memorizing the chromatic scale is to start using it and to use it with a chromatic tuner. Now, I just got this tuner on Amazon, but you can find tons of them. I know one brand that's good is Diodario. They just made a new one, which is rechargeable. That's why I bought this. It was a rechargeable tuner. Unfortunately, the light isn't so visible, so I don't know how much of the tuning you were able to actually see. But nonetheless, get a chromatic tuner because you'll need it later next week when we look at how to tune your guitar correctly, but also it will be the best way. It's a tool, really. As you play notes, you say, well, what note is that? And you'll say, oh, it's this note, and then you can verify it. But at some point or another, you'll want to stop looking at it altogether, and you'll see if you can start using your mind actively to memorize which notes are which on the fretboard, at least starting with the low E string. Next week, like I said, we'll look at standard tuning and how to tune all of the strings. But until then, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this informative and helpful. If you did, please give the video a like. Please, of course, consider subscribing. And thank you to all the people that do subscribe. I'll see you at the next video. Ciao for now.